I heard there's a new Johnny Harris video about the coming Cold War, and it's not like 40 minutes long, so maybe I can watch it. We're heading into a new Cold War. Johnny Harris is really pushing this theme lately with like the China videos and stuff. This is basically just him like making videos about the same topic over and over again. Very substanceless, very like reliant on like the presentation of his editors to like make it flashy and put in sound effects and stuff to keep the viewers' attention, so they don't notice that he's basically making the same video for the 5th time. Anyway, let's click it.
The world is changing, and it's changing fast. We're exiting a period of incredible growth and relative stability, where after the most destructive war in human history, the US rose to power as the
Johnny Harris and his GDP per capita graphs. You love to see it.
Global leader.
The American people in their righteous might will win through...
Wow, this is completely substanceless already. I can already tell this is going to be a nothing video as usual.
Absolute victory.
And as that leader, the US created new structures like NATO and the World Trade Organization. They established rules about trade, rules about economics, rules about justice, rules that they based on Western philosophical values. Now,
wow. The most just unbelievable, like uncritical, like presenting of like, you know, the Western colonial powers and their ideology and what they say about themselves as it like as face value as possible to like celebrate it and talk about how great it was. But unfortunately, that's coming to a close soon because of the evil China and probably also Russia. My rules-based international order
now being projected around the globe by a country with an astounding amount of alliances and military hardware. For a time, another great empire.
It's funny how like he's like rules-based order, and then the next second he's like, this country is so powerful and it has so much military hardware and it's so strong and it uses the military to kill everyone. But I guess that's part of the rules, so it's okay.
Challenged that order,
the rules-based
operating with
order.
A different set of rules, a different set of values and philosophies, trading with their own bloc and working with their own alliances.
But they're not going to get explained like the supposedly superior Western values are they?
But it couldn't last. The collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s left the US and their rich allies as the sole setters of the rules, the holders of the power. So the US doubled down, and their system of liberal values, democracy, and free trade spread and fortified.
Like this idea that the US values democracy, free trade, you know, all of that stuff. It's just like always in a Johnny Harris video, it's said like as if the rhetoric is true. The rhetoric is presented as if it's 100% true. Everything is taken at face value. Always. Never criticized in any way, shape, or form, never questioned. It's just sort of how it is. It's like I don't know, like a 5th grade, like American history indoctrination class or something, honestly. This is that level of like educational content.
Throughout the world. But when you're the global leader, when you're the one who sets all the rules, you get to decide when you follow your own rules and when you don't. Being the global...
Wow, it's almost like the rules were never actually meant to be rules anyway, and they were just there in order to limit what other countries can do to the US's own advantage, like something called imperialism maybe.
Superpower has turned more into being the global policeman. Over these last 75 years, the US has been known to violate the values, norms, and ideals that it built the whole global system off of, cozying up to strongman dictators, throwing out democratically elected governments, fueling regional wars, and generally trying to stamp out communism across the globe. And anyone who didn't want to play by America's rules was cast out as an insane pariah in need of regime change.
The Iraqi regime.
It doesn't really work when you say this, when you are largely in agreement with this though. Like we've seen Johnny Harris's other video about US interventions, and the way that he presents, for example, the invasion of Iraq, the second invasion of Iraq rather, and for example the bombing of Libya and the killing of Gaddafi, he presents that as like something that was good because the subjects on the other end of it deserved it. And it was just sort of accidentally went wrong, and we don't actually know why it happened. He specifically says 2 or 3 times, we don't know why this happened. We know why it happened. It's because what the US says about itself is obviously false.
Has plotted to develop anthrax.
Like all of the stuff that the US says, it doesn't say it because it believes in any of it. It's just rhetoric in order to justify its actual goals, which is to make a whole lot of money for itself at the expense of everyone else, or itself being like the companies that the US basically represents.
And nerve gas.
And it being the center of the global capitalist system, etc.
And nuclear weapons for over a decade.
And yet, despite this double game the US has played, this system has been a part of the most peaceful period of human history.
Holy shit.
Major empires don't fight each other like they used to. And a major reason is because they came to understand that getting in line with the
Major empires didn't fight each other during the entire Cold War either.
American-led system would mean economic opportunity and growth.
Wow. This is Johnny Harris. Like, he pays lip service to the idea that, like, maybe the US isn't everything it claims to be. And the next second he's like, actually, yeah, the US is everything it claims to be. There's so much economic opportunity and growth now. I've already debunked his last video where, like, in my big video on my channel. I mean, I'll bring it up just in case someone here is watching who doesn't actually know that, though I'm pretty sure people do. Because people who watch my second channel are generally people who already watch my first channel. In this video, his entire narrative of, like, neoliberal progress and prosperity of, the last 20, 30 years being amazing was thoroughly destroyed. But he's still claiming it. He's still claiming it. All that he does is, like, put a graph on the screen, no context, makes a very broad claim that the graph doesn't actually even remotely come close to proving, and then move on as if what he said is true. It's the Johnny Harris video par excellence.
It wasn't worth a war. Fighting against this system often meant destruction and losing deals for all sides. This peace was also helped by the existence
God damn, the people who fought against the US invasions.
of the most powerful weapons ever
They were making, because, like, Vietnam didn't just allow themselves to be colonized by the US in their puppet state, they caused a lack of prosperity for all sides.
invented, which great powers didn't dare use on each other. The American-led system has meant stability and an incredible amount of trade, leading to a dramatic reduction in global poverty. But that era is coming to an end.
Hey, it's me, not in the VO booth here on camera, so I can just tell you about something. I'm not sure if you've heard that the goal of this channel is kind of developing, let's say. We want to become the place for rigorous independent journalism on the internet.
No, you don't. No, you don't want that. There's nothing rigorous or journalistic or anything about your videos. Let's skip this fucking sponsor spot. Get out of here.
Which until recently
On all of my videos. And for the rest of you, let's dive back into the globe.
in part thanks to the US-led order,
Thank
China, which until recently was the most populous
Thanks to the US-led order.
country on Earth, has risen to become the second largest economy and world's largest military based on active forces. And more, China sees the US as an unfair policeman of the global order, only holding to the rules that benefit them. And this projection of
Sounds like China is correct.
values and philosophies from the West to the leaders in China, this looks a lot like the modern day version of colonialism. They see this hypocritical American empire drunk on power that they've had since 1945, an America that is increasingly defensive because it's in decline, with its broken politics, divided people, and a complacency with their spot at the top. So China is building a competing system. In March 2023, China's leader Xi Jinping announced his Global Civilization Initiative, where he stated that countries must, quote, refrain from imposing their own values or models on others, and refrain
Oh no, that's bad news for the USA. We don't want that.
from stoking ideological confrontation. So instead of the hypocritical colonialism of the US imposing their human rights and democracy around the world, his
Oh, the US loves human rights and it loves democracy. Johnny Harris never does not just prevent, like, Western, like, ideology at face value as if everything they say about themselves is true. It's incredible.
system would be transactional, stripping
You see? China is against human rights and democracy. That's what they want. They just want to destroy human rights and democracy. That's why they're there.
away the veil of what he views as a hypocritical, rules-based order that is built to basically benefit one group. The Chinese system would be built on common interests, beneficial deals, and opportunistic alliances, not purported philosophical values. And unlike decades past, China now has the military and the money to make it happen, to ignore the rules of the global superpower and to make their own, to engage with the world in a different way, to pursue Chinese interests outside of
It's interesting, like, how his evidence for China apparently wanting to spread what he just said, like, militarily, which is obviously what he's implying, because he's like, China has a big military. Look at all these scary planes and troops and stuff that China has. It's just that they have them. It's not that they've actually done anything with them, that they've actually used them to do that or in any way, shape, or form. It's just that they have them. This is, like, a big problem that people like this often run into, is they try to, like, draw an equivalence or claim that China is worse than the US, etc., etc., and then they can't actually point to when China is worse than the US in terms of, like, global destruction. When? How exactly? Where's the Chinese Iraq? Where's the Chinese Vietnam? Where's the Chinese Afghanistan? Where's the Chinese coups? Where's the Chinese anything, really? Any of the really shitty stuff that the US is just not really any Chinese analog. But they have to imply that it's going to happen, just based on the fact they have a military, basically. You know, with the US, we don't need to just say, oh, it's definitely going to happen. It's definitely going to happen. Trust me, because I said so. We don't have to, because it has happened. They've done it a million times before. And with China, like, this idea that they could potentially do that if they wanted to is presented as if it's equal to the US actually doing it for decades upon decades. And it's not.
the system. And so now you see a competition between these two great powers that have become deeply economically entwined over the last 50 years. And now they're slowly decoupling. And around the world, you see China planting seeds for its new system, using state-backed money.
What system? In what way is China exporting its system anywhere in the world? China does not export its political system. Like, yeah, it wants to like gain economic influence in other countries, trade with them, you know, buy their resources, shit like that. But it's not literally trying to export its own system because it doesn't have a system that it has designed specifically for itself, as the US has, in order to benefit from exporting it.
Money to invest in infrastructure projects all over the globe. This gives China a presence in many new countries, tying these countries to Chinese debt, which often
This is just not true at all, by the way.
translates into future leverage. In March,
They are trying to China is trying to tie countries to Chinese debt by giving them better terms on loans than the West did, and that is like his comparison here. This is how it always goes as well. You have China like giving countries loans to build infrastructure or whatever, and this is not only removed from the context of the fact that they are taking these loans because the terms for these loans are better than the terms of the loans that the West is offering them, usually from the IMF, which comes with very coercive terms like neoliberal structural adjustments, forcing you to completely change your economic system to benefit foreign companies. China doesn't do that. They give you the loan and they want you to pay it back, and that's literally it. It doesn't come with all of these like additional terms that you got to abide by. So China gives countries better terms, they take the better terms, and that's framed as like incredibly nefarious or something, when for one, it's obviously not as bad as what the West has been doing for a very long time and in a much more expansive way. And for two, it's obviously not comparable to the actual like military imperialism, the political interference and shit that the US does all around the world. So it's just grasping at straws, basically. It's propping up this supposed wrong that China does when the US not only does it worse, but the US does far worse things that China also doesn't do at all. So it's just a ridiculous narrative. I've seen it a million times before. That's how I know how to respond to it immediately. Johnny Harris doesn't have a single original bone in his body, so of course.
2023, China sent diplomats to the Middle East for the first major effort to broker a peace deal between Saudi Arabia
Wow, this is awful. A peace deal?
and Iran, these two bitter rivals. This is something that the US couldn't do, and it showed the declining influence that the US has on this region. But the US still remains on top, and they will as long as
It's not that the US couldn't do it. It's that the US doesn't want to do it because the US uses Iran as like its fucking Middle Eastern boogeyman, and Saudi Arabia is supposed to be like its Middle Eastern proxy state. So it's not that the US couldn't do that. It's why would the US want to do that? That's really all there is to it.
they can control the economic and financial systems that the world operates on, which they do, for now. But China is challenging this as well, working with Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa, or the
BRICS is just way overstated. I think most people who talk about BRICS like it's some sort of important formal alliance don't fucking know what they're talking about, especially because like China isn't exactly friendly with India, right? BRICS is just like it's not even in a block of any sort. It's just like a conference basically, and it has like its own bank, like its own development bank, and that's really all there is to it. It's not like this any real sort of alliance at all. People who talk like, and this is not just Johnny Harris who does this, like people who support China love to overstate the importance of BRICS as well. It just really isn't that big of a deal. It really is not like a formal alliance between these countries or anything of the sort.
Countries to develop an alternative economic bloc. These are all major growing economies, and they will only become more important in the next 2 decades. Since 2009, the BRICS countries have been stepping up their cooperation, meeting annually, creating a new development bank to invest in their countries, and coordinating on various policies. The BRICS countries are becoming a potential rival to the G7 countries, which represent the US-led order. BRICS countries are even discussing creating their own currency that they share between these 5 growing economies.
They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
That's Moscow. That's Moscow. That's such a Moscow thing. We need to like starve people to death. We need to starve these fucking people to death. So we need to make sure that we maintain our economic control so that we can fucking sanction the ever-loving fuck out of these motherfuckers. That's basically the narrative there. Ooh boy, I love how Moscow that is.
Which is currently the standard for international trade, and a major reason why everyone has to play nice with the US. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a major pushback against the Western security and economic order, and it showed us which countries will fall on which side of that divide. You can see that most countries aren't taking a side here. They aren't siding with Russia and China or with the Western bloc. You could call these the non-aligned countries, the undecided, the countries that China and the US will be looking to influence into their system.
Why is China yellow?
Let's highlight the 25 largest economies among these non-aligned countries, at least according to the Economist Intelligence Unit. These are the economies that the US is working to keep on their side, to keep in their system, and that China is trying to woo to join their new transactional system. But this Cold War is different than the last one, the one where the USA and the Soviet Union forced countries to deeply choose a side based on ideological convictions about capitalism versus communism. This new rising Cold War could be much less black and white. Instead, in this much more globalized and interconnected world,
Who was the black and who was the white in the other one then? I think we all know what he means.
non-aligned countries will exploit this bidding war between the superpowers to get them the best trade and security deals possible. Like in Brazil, where this is already happening.
I mean, why wouldn't they? For one, they did that already. A lot of them did that already before. But for two, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't you? Why is this a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing that there's more than one option now? Why?
Brazil is a massive country who is a super close ally with the United States. And yet, they're a part of the BRICS bloc with China, which is one reason Brazil refused
Brazil is not a super close ally of the US. It's not true.
to sell weapons to Ukraine when the country requested a deal. They're already walking this line between their interests that align with the US order and their interests that align with China. Brazil's president traveled to Beijing in April 2023, and not only did the Brazilian president sign around 20 new agreements on technology, trade, and agriculture, but he actually asked Beijing to help him negotiate the war in Ukraine. So even as the US and China cut ties, Brazil is showing that they're not going to take a side. They're going to play both sides to their own benefit. India is kind of doing the same thing.
It really is kind of coming off like the US is kind of a victim of these dastardly countries that are daring to act in their own self-interest once.
Getting lots of cheap oil and nearly half of their weapons from Russia, and then getting a quarter of their weapons from Europe, and recently securing $200 billion in funding from the US for Indian technology startups. Saudi Arabia gets almost all of its weapons from the United States, but is turning away from the US in other ways like trade, where China is now their top trading partner. In late 2022, China and Saudi Arabia signed a strategic partnership agreement, meaning that their leaders will be meeting more frequently. There will be more trade, more technology transfer, and more diplomacy. Turkey is a member of NATO, and generally aligned with the West, but also has to walk a fine line here. Because it has strong economic ties to Russia, Turkey also doesn't want to lose out on China's economic expansion. China has this Belt and Road Initiative that runs right through Turkey, and they're hoping to court more Chinese investment in transportation, energy, and mining. Pakistan is a country that has been aligned with the US in recent years.
Is he going to go through all of them?
And a partner on the war on terror, but it also entertains investment and trade with China, including a $62 billion investment from China's Belt and Road Initiative to create this economic...
Can you believe that Pakistan has extensive trade and economic ties with the country that is right here? Can you believe that? I honestly, I find it very, very concerning and nefarious that the country that's here
corridor
has more ties with the country that's here than the country that's so far away that it doesn't show up on the screen right now. That's pretty nefarious. That's certainly not expected at all.
Between the two countries. The continent of Africa is full of mostly non-aligned countries. It's also where China has been busy giving huge loans and building bridges, ports, mines, and railways, all with the goal of tying these countries to the future Chinese way of doing things. And China is...
What is the Chinese way of doing things? Where is any evidence of China trying to export its system to other countries? The way that he presented the Chinese way of doing things was not exporting your ideology to other countries, not forcing an economic or political system upon them. It sounds pretty good to me. If that's the Chinese way of doing things, maybe it should be exported everywhere.
Expanding trade here too, trading $254 billion with Africa in...
Where is this evidence of China wanting to export its own political economic system or anything like that anywhere else? Where is the evidence that China wants to do anything but just make money from other countries? If anything, the current neoliberal world order greatly benefits China because it has a pretty large state sector in its economy and state, a lot of state-led decision-making, which allows it to undercut the ever-loving fuck out of countries that have more private economies, like the US, for example. US oil companies get fucking destroyed by China everywhere China goes. The US oil companies won't bid against Chinese oil companies anymore. They just drop out immediately because Chinese oil companies buy oil to supply the Chinese market. They don't really care if they're not paying they can't make a profit off it. Whereas American oil companies are all private and all they want to do is make a profit. So that's one way in which they have a massive advantage. And that's basically how the world order that was exported everywhere by the US, neoliberal sort of borderline free trade for the poor countries, but not for us rich countries sort of thing that the US exported everywhere has helped China because they can take advantage of that. And for one, I don't think they'd want to change it, even if they could. And for two, they haven't provided any indication that they want to export their political or economic system anywhere. So just insisting on that they want to over and over again without actually showing that they want to in any way, shape, or form is obviously stupid as hell. But he's going to keep doing it, and he's done it like 4 or 5 times already.
2021, while the US only traded $44 billion, a sixth the amount of China. China's investment has been swift and effective here and all over the globe in garnering new friends and allies, laying the foundation for their competing world order. But the US isn't just going to sit back and let this happen. They're already responding. Big names.
No evidence that China wants to do anything even resembling like a different world order or whatever.
Like Kamala Harris, the vice president, or Janet Yellen, the head of the Federal Reserve, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, have all visited Africa in 2023. President Biden went to Saudi Arabia last year, despite calling the country a, quote, pariah state on the campaign.
That's really funny because Saudi Arabia is like one of the only US allies that can actually have any sort of power over it. So obviously it's the US isn't going to do shit to it because not because the US needs Saudi oil, but it needs Saudi oil because the Saudi oil is it's like abundant enough that the Saudis can cause serious fluctuations in the global oil market. They don't actually need to buy the Saudi oil to use themselves, but they need to make sure that the Saudis don't fuck with the oil price.
Trail. He was there to try to claw back some influence that was being taken by China. And then, of course, the US is hitting China straight on, cutting them off from West.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is a pariah state, says the guy who was the vice president of the Obama administration, which very well known for supporting something that the Saudi Arabian state was doing in Yemen, like, you know, genociding countless people, for example.
Technology to hamper their economic and military progress. The US and its allies in Asia are also encircling China with their military in the Pacific, sending billions of dollars of weapons and infrastructure.
As I said at the beginning, he's basically just rehashing videos that he's already made here. He's made like at least 5 videos that are very similar to this one, and this part right here, he went over this in like a video that I reacted to a couple of weeks ago. Exactly this.
Into China's backyard. So it looks like we're in the early days of a new multipolar world, a competition between a great superpower and a rising superpower that wants to lead a new system based on different values. The result is likely
there's absolutely no evidence for that still.
The undoing of a lot of the globalization and interconnectedness that has developed in the last 70 years.
I don't think that's true at all. I don't think China wants that to happen at all. Like, they would like to be more important in the system, they'd perhaps like to be at the head of it, but they don't really want to change it. You know, you can't just look at their local political system, their domestic political system, and say that they want to export that everywhere else because they've shown no indication of wanting to do that.
And for now, I think what we'll see is countries won't be choosing a side hastily. Instead, they'll play both of these great powers off of each other to get the best deal for their country. I'm not sure how long they'll be able to do this as tensions rise and the pressure mounts to choose a side. But for now, what's clear is that we're moving into uncharted waters.
Okay, that was just another pretty substanceless video from Johnny Harris, full of pretty wild claims that he doesn't actually substantiate in any way. Very rehashy of some other videos that he's already made. I don't know, like a nothing burger, basically. It's a typical Johnny Harris video, relies entirely on flashy animations and sound effects, which are good, certainly, but that'd be better if the talents of the people who make these videos look good and actually work were put into videos that weren't so substanceless and garbage.